Well, they've been without blinds for a while, so a little bit longer ain't gonna hurt them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually not a bad location. It's pretty nice.
Yeah, I was fortunate. I don't know. I was thinking, Jimmy, at 63 years old, everybody say, when you're going to slow down, and so I ended up opening a second office.
Oh, what the heck? That's what it's for.
Yeah.
Do it when you can.
Yeah.
That's what I say.
Hey, good evening. I'm trying a new microphone tonight. Evidently, my old one wasn't working. Am I coming across clear?
Yeah, I hear you.
That's better.
Yes, sir, you are.
A lot clearer than you were last month.
Thank you. Okay, good. You can't test yourself. You can test the machine, but you don't know what you got on the other side.
So, Mike, do you see our friend Mike Driss often? You're muted. You're muted. Can't hear you.
Yeah, I have dinner with him every once in a while because he's Peter's godfather. So we meet, maybe once a month, sometimes twice a month, just for dinner.
I talk to him a lot, but I haven't seen him in quite a while.
Well, he's building that
During
new
all
house.
this COVID stuff.
He's building that new house, so
I know. I've seen it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how's Kay?
It's good. She's good. Her dad's having a hard time.
Yeah. We're at that age, John.
Yeah. Tell me about it. How's Tina doing?
She's doing well. She's doing well. Like I said, we've been fortunate. We live a good life. So, the God blessed us pretty good. So, I'm gonna let me shut off. I'm kind of watching the hockey at the same time, so I'm gonna shut it off. So I can concentrate on what we're doing here.
All right, it looks like 7 o'clock to me. Would like to call to order the August 17th, 2020 regular meeting of the Tarpon Springs Planning and Zoning Board. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Seaman,
Here.
Mr. Kouskoudas,
Here.
Mrs. McCumber,
Here.
Mr. Vetzi,
Here.
Mr. Stavropoulos,
Here.
Ms. Vigil, Mr. Morgan,
Here.
Mr. Koulianos.
Here.
All right. We will begin with item number 2, the approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as written for June 15th, 2020 meeting.
Second.
No. Do we need a roll call or do we just do all in favor? I don't remember.
You can do a voice vote if you want to. So you can do aye and nay, or you can do a roll call.
Okay, we'll just do a voice vote on that. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, minutes are approved. That brings us to item number 3, application 20-85 to the Land Development Code, or a Land Development Code amendment. It would be ordinance 2020-22, amending Article IV by adding sections 5605, 5606, establishing regulations for mobile food dispensing vehicles. Do we have a staff report?
We do. I'll jump in. Renee Vincent, Planning and Zoning Director for the City of Tarpon. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to share my screen and bear with me. I'm still a neophyte at this. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And not sure what the background noise is there, but mobile food dispensing vehicles. So the reason that we are bringing this forward now, effective July 1st of this year, House Bill 1193 went into effect. And within that regulation, the state basically created regulations around mobile food dispensing vehicles that pretty much preempts and regulates that to the state level. Basically, local jurisdictions have been preempted from all regulation involving licenses, registration, permits, and fees. What we do retain the ability to regulate our operations, but we cannot prohibit them from operating entirely within the city. So kind of our current and past practice of regulation around these, it's just customarily been known that, mobile food trucks are prohibited in the city of Tarpon Springs. The actual land development code is silent to the regulation of these. And in the past, this was interpreted as basically being prohibited since the use was not specifically listed anywhere as allowed in a zoning district. Also under previous interpretations of our occupational licensing, which we now refer to as a business tax receipt license, mobile food vending was limited to peddlers and they had to move about every 15 minutes. So, those two things in combination effectively eliminated the use within the city in prior interpretations. The only real exception to that would be as a temporary use or as a city-sponsored special event. So in order to deal with this now, since we cannot, prohibit them from operating within the city entirely, we felt it was necessary to get something established around how the operations of mobile food vending vehicles. So we're proposing 2 new sections under the special use section of the Land Development Code, which is Article 4. The first would be 56.05, establishing mobile food dispensing vehicles as temporary uses, and I'll explain that in detail. And then another section that would create or allow mobile food dispensing vehicles as accessory to an existing food or drink establishment. So when we're saying temporary, mobile food dispensing vehicles temporary, these would be food trucks that would, go to a business, I'll use the Lowe's parking lot as a good example. They go to a place where they can vend during the day between the hours of 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. Right now we are proposing that would be limited to where retail sales or restaurants are permitted in an applicable zoning district. That would exclude the special area plan, which includes the sponge docks in the downtown. And I'll show you a map of that. some other additional regulations, you could operate, you cannot operate from public rights of way or city-owned property or parking lots, again, unless that's in conjunction with a special event. The figures on the right, this would be what we would envision. You can vend on site and in a parking area or a parking lot. You cannot, you would not be able to vend from the street. We're trying to keep these things from operating off of the streets. So you could not operate from public rights of way or city-owned property or parking lots, again, unless it's a special event. We propose to limit that to 1 mobile food dispensing vehicle per parcel. So you can't, stack 10 or 12 of these out in your parking lot and have a impromptu food court. And when not in operation, they have to be stored in an area where parking of on-site or storage of vehicles is a permitted use. So again, we don't want these things being permanently parked somewhere and they just show up, operate, and then close them up and leave them where they are. And then you must dispose of all waste products in accordance with local, federal, and state regulations. Again, we don't want these being dumped irresponsibly with, the products and things like that and waste materials. So we tried to give you a generalized map for the temporary uses where these would be allowed. So basically we said where retail sales or restaurants are permitted use. So these areas that are in this reddish pink color are the areas where you would be allowed to operate. This area in blue here, I'm sorry, I'm going to point over here, the right one. This area in blue, this is the CRA special area plan for the sponge docks in the downtown. So this area, they would not be able to do this temporary daily vending. And then all the area in yellow would be off limits because those are not business districts. So this is a fairly good depiction of where you'd be allowed to operate. And you see there are some, there may be some issues with that because you've got these little spots here and there where you've got, commercial general or, neighborhood type business stuck in a neighborhood. So that may be something that we need to address. Moving on to the second piece of this, proposed 56.06, mobile food dispensing as accessory to a food or drink establishment. And what's driving this is we have a lot of, and frankly, some of this is coming out of the current COVID situation. We have things like breweries and places that are, establishments that really, they're not in the business of having a restaurant. And so we've set this up so that to really address a couple of issues. In some instances, we do have restaurants that do have a food truck or a trailer that they set up and operate. These have kind of been largely just kind of gone unnoticed or without regulation, in some areas. Example of that would be the Rusty Belly's truck. They operate on their site. So what this is proposing is that if you have an existing food or drink establishment, you can, through an application process, with our technical review committee, you can get approval to have an accessory food truck. You don't have to own it. You can contract that with another provider if you like, but the technical review committee would review a site plan or site layout to look at how the food truck would operate. The operating hours would be limited to those of the primary use or the business. You would have to identify if you're requesting city services like water, sewer, or solid waste pickup, because these are basically envisioned. They're not going to really go anywhere probably for, they're going to be set up there on a more kind of semi-permanent basis, if you will. You would have to demonstrate compliance with the city's fats, oils, and grease management program. You would have to have an evacuation or mitigation plan in the event of a hurricane or a windstorm or a flooding event. Again, we don't want these things, being washed away or blown away in an event like that. You would have to have a permanent power connection. So if you are in operation, you're running on electric and you're not or a generator for long periods of time. And you would have to have an operating agreement for the use of the sanitation facilities, restrooms, and seating of the primary use or business. And again, that's when the owner of the food truck is different than the actual business where it might be operating. So some of the things that I think are discussion points with this Regarding the temporary use operations, those are the ones where they would set up and vend and then go home in the evening. You know, are the allowable locations correct at this point? You know, is it too restrictive or is it not restrictive enough? You know, do we want to maybe just limit that to the US 19 corridor? We can look at it in various ways. Hours of operation may be a discussion point. Right now it's proposed between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. Private property versus public streets and city-owned property. I'm not sure there's much of a discussion point there, but again, right now, you'll be prohibited from operating on public streets. And the number allowed per parcel, again, we're recommending only one would be allowed on a given parcel of land. And that obviously is in conjunction with an existing, you know, retail type of establishment. Discussion points regarding those that would be accessory to a food or drink establishment. Again, allowable locations. Right now, you have to pair up with an existing food or drink establishment. We haven't really defined that. We probably should. And then, you know, some of the finer points, the things that we see. So does that mean a takeout, you know, sandwich shop or a deli would qualify? So we think we probably need to further define that a little bit as to what qualifies. And should there be a minimum seating requirement of that primary use? So it has to be an eating or drinking establishment that perhaps has 50 seats at least, so that you know that you have area for people, patrons to go inside, sit down and eat, which is what this is intended to, you know, to serve. So with that, I will stop and I'll unshare my screen if I can find the thing to do that. And really open this up for discussion with you all before we take this forward to the Board of Commissioners. We did have Karen Lemons, our Economic Development Manager. She sent this out pretty comprehensively to the business community. We only got a couple of responses so far. Generally, those were in favor. And just really looking for, you know, for some clarification. I think Pat McNeese emailed those out to you a bit earlier today. So with that, I'll stop and we can discuss, and I'll, you know, try to answer questions and listen to where we may have missed or what we can do to make this better. Thank you.
One question about the number of units per parcel. I can see if you had a very small parcel, definitely you couldn't accommodate more than one. But in the event that we had a larger property ownership where people had more than one thing going on, there may be a situation where somebody might have a case where more than one would be appropriate. And I don't know how you really address that, but
I think that's a very good point. We were trying to start with one and see where we go.
yeah.
I do have some comments, Renee. First of all, Renee, welcome back.
Thank you.
It's good to have you back. I really mean that. Here's my concern. First of all, with the map that you provided, I like the idea of seeing it in the industrial areas where there are employers and businesses who employees really can't leave their, you know, the place to go get something to eat. I saw that along the north side of the river and along 19 corridor, which I think is a proper venue for it. My biggest concern is, you know, we have these restaurants that are border restaurants, and I like where you excluded the Sponge Duck area, but when you're referencing with regard to like an establishment that could basically almost, quite frankly, quasi-permanent restaurant on your property without having to go through with some of these property owners that pay, taxes and stuff like that have established a brick and mortar restaurants that they have to go through. And, if I had a beer wine place and invite a permanent, meal truck on my property, in essence, I've created a restaurant, and they don't have to go nearly through what a restaurant would have to go through for operating and the cost of operating. So that, I think that's fun and fair to those people that have the stake in restaurants.
No, fair point. We've been wrestling with this kind of back and forth as, what's the best way to do this. Honestly, one approach on the, you know, on the extreme side would just be to say, you know, hey, you know, you can have them operating in that temporary situation out on the US 19 corridor or north of the Anclote River in the industrial areas and call it a day, and not allow that accessory use, if you will, that we're proposing in the 5605. That's, you know, what we can't do is just prohibit them altogether. So that's kind of the balance that we're trying to strike. We did hear from, I mean, frankly, a lot of the breweries, are a bit of a driver of that. The other of the, being the accessory too, they don't want to be in the restaurant business, but right now they're effectively shut down because they don't have any kind of food service under this COVID situation. So that was a consideration, and I realized that that could all be temporary. So yeah, I understand the fear.
Yeah, and Renee, I understand that with some of those establishments, but I know some of them have working relationships with certain restaurants in town who have a menu they deliver to the restaurant. If there was something on an emergency or because of the COVID,
Right.
that would be understandable. But I just don't want to get into and I represent various restaurants in Tarpon Springs.
Sure.
So not to be conflicted out, but I do.
Okay.
And I know that they have to go through to open, and I think it's just fundamentally unfair that somebody could put a permanent mobile food truck in their parking lot and basically credit quasi restaurant. And so I like the idea of the corridors where they're at. By the way, the one that was out, I think it was off on Gulf Road on your map, next to the that little island of red. Is that by the gas station? Is that where you're referring?
It is, yes.
Okay. All right. And there's a big brick mortar restaurant right next to it.
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right.
A point of order with the chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I'm the new kid in the class, so I don't know. Are we just have free flowing conversation, or is that how the planning and zoning works?
Pretty much.
Okay.
It's fairly loose for questions to the staff at this point.
I have a few questions. Can I jump in?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And thank you for having me here on your board on my first inaugural meeting, and Ms. Vincent, thank you for the presentation. So I have a few questions. Do these vehicles, these food trucks, do they have to meet like setback requirements?
Generally, the short answer would be yes, they would. You're generally not going to park one. If you're talking about the temporary daily use, like out on US 19, they're going to operate in a parking lot, and that would be compliant.
Okay, so they can't be right up on. Let's say that somebody wants to put one right up on the street. They would have to be.
Correct.
Yeah.
But that's a very good observation. So we probably should at least acknowledge that compliance with whatever the zoning setbacks are, so that someone doesn't, if you do have a strip there between the parking lot and the road, that they don't park it there in the grass area. So that's a good observation. We should probably go ahead and add something to that effect.
How about, do they have to be permitted? Do they have to apply for permits with the city and pay?
There's the rub. Under the new legislation, we are preempted, and I'll defer to the attorney, but basically the state preempted the regulation for anything like licenses and permits and fees to the state. So the only thing we can really regulate is how they operate and where they operate, as long as we don't prohibit them entirely.
Yeah, and that's where I'm in agreement with Mr. Kuskudis, on these kinds of things having so little regulation compared to a brick and mortar restaurant that has to really go through a lot to be able to open. And then that leads to another question: appearance and size. How do we manage the appearance of these things? Because they could become some eyesores, right? If do it, and on looking at your map with the colors, the so the blue, how do you, so when you differentiate, say the blue doesn't mean that a truck can't go in the blue, right? It
The
could-
only,
could be
yeah, the
on
only
a
way that they can,
right?
the only way that they can operate in the blue area is that is under the accessory to an existing, basically, you know, food or drink establishment.
Okay,
So
and that-
they can operate like with a brewery. They can have an agreement and operate with a brewery or with another restaurant, but they can't just go set up shop in a retail space in that area and do business or in a parking lot.
With that said, if they are going to be in that historic district, do they have to meet the historic guidelines of appearance, and do they have to go before the historic board to be able to just place one of those there?
Not as it's drafted today.
Okay, that was another question.
That's a consideration.
I just have two more things, and I'll get to them quickly.
Sure.
So I'm also those hours. I think those hours should be tightened. I think 10 p.m. is pretty late to be serving food out of a truck. You know, you think, and what you don't want is these things to become attractive nuisances whereby, you know, they turn into like little, like late night drive-in,
right,
kind of places, and then create, you know, like we say, nuisances in the area, because most restaurants aren't serving till 10 o'clock just regular food. Now, if there's, you know, like the Tarpon Tavern might be open, but it's not. It's more for, you know, people there having a cocktail or something after they've gone to dinner there or somewhere else.
So
not a food truck. You wouldn't think a food truck would need to be open till 10 p.m.
Just a clarification. So that 8 to 10, that's only for the ones that would be operating in those red areas, not the blue area. Okay. So the blue area would be limited to whatever the hours of operation of the primary business is. So,
but even the places that, let's say, where you have a food truck that's coming to accommodate a, let's say, an industrial park, right? Where there's workers. And
there's nobody there at that hour.
Yeah, the truck pulls. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The truck pulls up for lunch. That pulls up for breakfast. Yep. Why is it pulling up there at 10 o'clock at night?
That's a very good point.
So
yeah, and I'll come back around on some of these. If there's a consensus of the board to what you would want to recommend, I'm more than happy to include that moving forward. That's why I'm happy I'm getting some feedback from you.
Thank you. That's what I have for now. Thank you very much.
Can I speak?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm just referencing in regards to the brick and mortar restaurants. Can they establish, or can you guys establish some kind of a proximity from a food truck to one of those establishments that are already there serving the people, like a brick and mortar? Like, can you establish some kind of a proximity distance? Let's say you can only park, say, 200 feet away or whatever, just in, considering what they're doing, their operation, and what the food truck is offering.
We could, I think you could establish that, again, as long as you don't have the effect of zoning them out of operation. That would be the only concern. Because I'm kind of hearing kind of the direction that the discussion's going. For those that are the temporary use, like, where you can go in, set up in the industrial area or whatever, we had said that basically where retail or restaurants are permitted use. So in that instance, Jim, would you be saying that you would prefer that they be separated, have a distance separation from any existing restaurants?
Correct.
Okay. All right.
And I'm saying, like, for example, say like there's a food truck that's serving Spanish food, and you have, like, let's say, just for all instances, a Taco Bell. They decide to park across the street or just maybe 20 feet away in the parking lot. That,
So
to me, that wouldn't seem
understand.
acceptable.
So one point of order with this, the food truck has to have they have to have permission from the property owner to park and vend. They can't just pull into the Lowe's parking lot or the Taco Bell parking lot and start vending. So
Well,
that's a matter of, I mean, that,
Well,
could
I
that
wasn't-
happen? I'm sure it probably could. But generally speaking, that's not, the intent is not to give them free run of every parking lot up and down
Right.
US
Well,
19.
Well, what I was referencing, say maybe the the Publix parking lot,
Mhm.
where there's multiple fast foods, and they
Right.
decide to park in the parking lot, the large parking lot, and have like there's a conflict with the existing brick and mortars.
That makes sense. So separation, okay.
I think that's a good point, because they could go right across the street from things too.
Right.
There are proximities there, so establish the distance between maybe something that you all can make up.
We can look at that, definitely.
That it may be a different situation though in dealing with the ones that would actually be located at a restaurant or a
Right.
brewery or
Right.
or something like that,
Right.
because I mean they're actually they're connected with a bricks and mortar facility in
Right.
that case.
That I understand.
Okay.
I have a couple comments if I can go next.
Proceed.
Hi, I wanted to say welcome to John.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, John.
Hi.
Hey,
Thank you.
welcome. I have two thoughts, and they're mostly administrative. The first easy one is they're all referred to as vehicles, but the one that you have in your example is a trailer. And
Right.
is there any differentiation? Because a vehicle is something that drives away and a trailer is a trailer. And then I also saw a notation that we didn't want to have said food vehicles parked in a way that couldn't be moved in an emergency. And if everyone under 5606 put a trailer up, we've got all these trailers stuck out there that can't be moved until they're hooked up. So that's just a thought about differentiating, and maybe they all need to be under their own power and trailers don't qualify. I don't know that. The second item I think that it's real ironic is that a few meetings ago, we went through laboriously a new sign code. And in that sign code, we particularly selected and discriminated against vehicles as signs. In other words, vans or trucks that came into parking lots of restaurants that had signs and acted as signs. And we said, nope, can't have any more of those in Tarpon Springs. And this, by a different route, in effect, negates that and invites them all right back in. And everybody gets a sign as long as they can just call it a food truck. I just think that's ironic. Can't have any effect on this, but it certainly, we're going to see a lot more of these trucks sitting in a lot more parking lots that are all going to look like these big signs that we just tried to get rid of. So that's the end of my comments on that.
With regard to the trailers versus trucks, or the mobile, the part of the ones that would be accessory to an existing restaurant or food business, part of the site plan or part of the review criteria for that with the accessory uses is an evacuation plan. So we would want those things to remain mobile. You're going to have to be able to move them if they're into it with a powered one themselves or a vehicle. They need to be maintain the licenses. They need to be able to operate. They need to be a functioning vehicle so that you can drive them out of there if necessary, or tow them out. Tow them out with another vehicle if necessary if it's a trailer. So it's a good observation. It is something good. What we're trying to do, if we do this and we do allow them, is to not allow them to become permanent fixture sitting in a parking lot somewhere. And the other thing we're really trying to avoid and make sure it doesn't happen is that you get one that's sitting on a vacant piece of property and sits there and just becomes an ad hoc restaurant. So that's what we're trying to avoid as well.
Well, there's kind of two typical types of trailers, I guess, when you get to the trailers, and there'd be the ones that are more like a recreational vehicle trailer that is built to have wheels and built to be towed. And then you get the mobile home type trailers where they actually set them up and then take the wheels and axles and everything out from under them. It may be worth noting
that we don't want.
that would not be acceptable.
Exactly.
Is it possible to have these I don't know, vehicles or whatever you're going to call them, trucks, to meet some kind of basic sign ordinance requirements? I know they want the whole idea of them to be decorative and such, but I think you hit exactly on what the big apprehension is for most people. One is that these things are just all over town and just unsightly, and then that they are just they don't fit in the areas that they're at. So like, again, downtown, trying to meet have a certain historic look, and then all of a sudden you've got these crazy looking vehicles. So and the sponge docks as well. So that's that would be a concern. I can see that here in COVID times, like Mr. Kuskuda said, in COVID times, you put the picture of Rusty Bellies. I could see, that could be very useful for them and for their business, because they have a lot of carryouts. They could have that food truck set up to where people could come up quicker, get their food, not have to go inside the restaurant, not block the thoroughfare and all that. So you could see that being very helpful and helping their businesses to thrive. So I think that's kind of where people are. I think that nobody, and also having like Mr. Stavropoulos said, if they're going to have a whole different menu, that's in essence creating a brand new restaurant. It's a sandwich shop, and all of a sudden they've got they're selling lobsters over here out of this food truck or something. It's you could see this thing getting kind of out of control. So that's
no, those are all very, very relevant observations. So
I'll also follow-up comment. And I kind of want to dovetail on what Justin said, because before you came over, like he said, we went through the sign ordinance. One of the discussions we had was somebody had a vehicle that they wrapped, okay, and they parked it permanently in front of their establishment. Is that a sign? And so get to a point where if somebody's going to have a permanent, obviously I'm opposed to temporary quasi-restaurants at some of these facilities that have like beer, wine, and they've turned their proper business into a restaurant, quasi-restaurant. I'm totally opposed to that. But let's say that passed. We'll be back to, again, what Justin said about the sign ordinance, what we had to go through, and it was deemed that too would be a violation of the sign ordinance. So obviously giving that some obviously consideration. So I'm just trying to look at protecting. I think we all are trying to protect our bricks and mortar businesses that pay real estate taxes. It's one thing for somebody to bring their business into the community, take their tax dollars and leave, and the city really, I don't know what benefit they get from it. But I like the area plan to have, maybe with the exception of the Hess gas station, because there is a bricks and mortar place right next to it. You wouldn't want somebody having a truck giving pizza takeout next to the pizza place. And that goes back to what Mr. Vropoulos said. So again, I think y'all have done a good job of trying to narrow down the locations into the industrial area or the 19 corridor where those types of businesses, I think, would belong.
Can I just, and you can just, I guess we can just do this verbally. Is there a consensus of this board that you would really prefer to not see these as accessory to an existing restaurant or I'm sorry, existing food or drink establishment in that special area plan? You would just prefer to not see that period right now? Is there a consensus of that, or at least a majority of that? I mean, I'm just trying to get a feel for.
I would, again, oppose any opportunity for somebody to do a quasi-permanent restaurant in their parking lot if they had a different type of establishment. Again, it's not fair. So that's my opinion.
I would. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it gets complicated eliminating it in some parts of town and not in other parts of town, though. If you're letting a brewery in one location do it and not letting a brewery in another location do it, it just, for example, I would sort of have a problem with that, I think.
If I may, I'd provide maybe just a thought experiment on Renee, on your question there. I'll just use an example that has already been brought up. Let's use the Tarpon Tavern, bless his heart. So if we followed what you were looking for on consensus, that existing restaurants cannot have an accessory use, but yet Mr. Owner at Tarpon Tavern would like one, but he's not allowed. But yet there's a vacant lot just to the east, and lo and behold, that owner agrees to allow someone to drag a vehicle on there. And so Mr. Owner of Tarpon Tavern can't have one of his own, even though he would like to expand and serve more folks, but yet someone across the street can. And that's a pretty sticky wicket. I don't have an answer. I just wanted to throw out that thought experiment.
Well, and yeah, to clarify a bit on just looking at that particular instance, the way this is drafted now, you would not be able to just put one on a vacant lot. So it would have to be, and that's why it had to be accessory to an existing food or drink establishment. So Tarpon Tavern's a good example. They don't even have the room, so they functionally couldn't do it anyway. So there has to, the site circumstances have to work with you in order to be able to do that. You've got to have some kind of an area on your site to be able to set one up. So like Rusty Belly's is a good example. They've got the trailer that sits in that patio area. It's not blocking parking. It's not obstructing anything. It's in that instance, it's actually, it's an arm of their business. So that's a little bit different than, say, if one of the breweries that, if they've got room and they want to be able to have some kind of food service versus, they could maybe contract with, a provider to come in and set up for, the hours of 5 to 9 p.m. or something. Maybe it's not every day, maybe it's whatever. But you have to have the place to be able to set up, and you still you can't take up your required parking. So you've got to have fundamentally some space to work with. So that's going to inherently set up some inequities. I mean, there's just no way around it.
So if I may, I'm sorry, Chairman. I think I'm misunderstanding something. Could I get a clarification from Renee first? 5605 mobile food dispensing vehicles temporary. They're not married to an existing restaurant. If I understand that, they can be at a retail location.
That is correct. Only in those areas that are showing up on that map as like that reddish pink color.
Okay. And then the others in the other map are the 5606, which are tied to a food and drink establishment. So,
They would be allowed in that area. They could go actually anywhere if there's a retail food and drink establishment and
Okay.
go in as the accessory,
Okay.
so, yeah. But they would
Okay.
also be allowed in that blue special area plan boundary.
okay. And if I may, I want to expand on that just a little bit more, mostly about 5605, but it may tie to 5606. And that has to do with restrooms, accessibility to restrooms, and then the magic ADA. It just seems to me that although we've been preempted by the state, is that lucky for a mobile food truck vendor, they've been able to leapfrog decades or even longer of regulations in regards. So someone can set up a food and beverage dispenser without access to a bathroom, which I think is personally bad manners, and not have any ADA requirements that a brick and mortar would be required to have, because that means that, for example, food or a thought experiment, someone who is handicapped in a wheelchair can't access that same window, such as everybody else, get change and do such. I'm not being a nabob. I love food trucks, but there just seems to be a tremendous that they're given so much latitude that everyone else isn't. It just strikes me as difficult to work with.
Understood.
Okay.
And I don't know, if, I'll defer to the attorney. We didn't get into regulating, the ADA aspects of a food truck. I don't know if there's, I don't know how deep we can get into something like that.
Yeah, as far as, the mobile food truck is already defined by virtue of the statute. All the permitting and regulation as far as that is preempted to the state. So keep in mind, these are not restaurants. They're not even mobile restaurants. They are legitimately just vehicles of which you serve food out of. There's no tables being set up. There's no dining near there or picnic tables or anything like that. It is a get up, get your food and come out. If they are going to make an accommodation for somebody in a wheelchair, they can certainly come out of the truck and help them, or out of the trailer, but that's not something that the city can regulate, especially by virtue of this ordinance. The only thing that the city can regulate is where they're allowed to operate. They have to allow them within the city boundaries, but it has to be where they are allowed to operate, not that they are allowed to operate or the mechanism by which they are allowed to operate, if that makes any sense.
But we could add to the 5605 that the retail or whatever area that's allowing them, that they have access to a bathroom, like we do in the other one.
It's going to be more like a zoning issue. So you're not necessarily going to be able to say you can only park them from the time period of 5 to 9 or whatever you're so choosing your hours to be, but you must be located near a restroom, a place where they can sit down and eat, this, that, and the other. I think you will find that you are unable to do so. It literally, the statute reads, regulation is preempted to the state, but a municipality, county, or other local government entity cannot prohibit the food trucks. They can regulate the operation of mobile food dispensing vehicles other than the regulations prescribed in subsection 2, which is regulation of licensing, registration, permits, and fees. So, I mean, perhaps you could do that. I would be very cautious in that, but it doesn't specifically prohibit you from doing that.
I think the other thing that when we were drafting this, I coordinated through several different departments to make sure that we were trying to capture as much as we could. And one thing I was very cognizant of was enforcement. And so it started out being a much more complex ordinance than it is right now, because when it gets down to it, from an enforcement standpoint, Officer Gasson needs to be able to say, hey, all right, they're in the red area and they're operating between 8 and maybe it's not 10, maybe it's 6, something earlier. So they're legal and they can have one per parcel. I mean, that's something that's easily to regulate. As soon as you start getting into things like bathrooms and things, now you're getting the building officials involved, and so it becomes much more complex to regulate. So simplicity from that temporary use standpoint was something that we were trying to achieve with this. Maybe we went too far.
And under 5606, the establishments where they're locating have to meet all those ADA requirements and have the bathrooms. and have a certain number of seats already. One question I had under that though is, should we, can we, I don't really know, I'm just throwing it out there, address seating in any way under 5606?
As accessory, yes, I think there we have, and that was a discussion point that I was hoping to get some input in. I think we could say, if it's going to be something that's accessory to the food or drink establishment, that primary food or drink establishment should have a minimum of, pick a number, 50 seats, something that does trigger the fact that it has bathrooms.
Right.
And that's why we also required that operational agreement, whatever that may be, whatever form that would be. We haven't defined that yet, between the primary business owner and the food truck, so that
Right.
the food truck is basically said, look, your patrons have to have access to that restaurant, to their seating, to their bathrooms, their facilities. That's the way this works. So that was the intent.
I like just as an illustration. Let's say we've got the distillery, and they've got they don't serve food, but they have the space that they could put a food truck. So they put in a food truck, maybe on a permanent under 5606, permanent or in a permanent place. And so they've got the bathroom, they've got the place where people could go in and eat or eat outside. And that's where the traditional bricks and mortar restaurants are being affected by somebody not having to meet what the bricks and mortar restaurants have to meet. And they, in essence, have established a restaurant without having to go through the process of creating a restaurant. I don't know if that illustration is a good one, but that's.
Oh, I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
It is a good one, because it is difficult to get a restaurant up and running. Incredibly difficult.
Well, and I'll just throw this out for food for thought, because one of the biggest challenges that we have in the docks area, and actually some of the parts of downtown, is in trying to establish not just a restaurant, but any new business, from brick and mortar. The base flood elevation requirements are really difficult to deal with. And so to go down to the docks and try to establish a restaurant today and meet the minimum base flood elevation requirements, that alone is hideously expensive. You either have to elevate it way up, or you got to flood proof a building. So, one of the thoughts is that, it is relatively simple to put in covered seating and establish a tiki bar, and those things are much easier to deal with from a flood zone perspective. And the mobile food truck allows that restaurant type of establishment without having to spend that kind of money. This is going to be an ongoing problem, for forever down at the docks, because it's so from the standpoint of at least allowing businesses to try to begin to get operational before they can invest the money into brick and mortar. That's a discussion point. I'm not saying it's a defense, a discussion point.
Yeah, I understand that, Renee, but you know what? Those bricks and mortars are paying real estate taxes, and
Sure, absolutely.
And someone driving a truck in is taking their money and heading out of town. In most cases. So that's.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
I
I have a question for the city attorney. The city attorney. If I know that they have now the state law that allows for food trucks, and we can limit obviously some of the usage of the food trucks. But where do you get to the point where you limit them so much that you are in violation of state law? And let's say, for example, you were to put, let's say that the decision was to only allow food trucks in the pink area and nowhere else under any other circumstances, other than the little pink triangle, rectangle on Gulf Road, which I have no idea why that's there. But
that's actually a restaurant and a gas station.
Yeah, other than that little square. But if you were to say, okay, you picked the pinks and you say, okay, that's all that they're allowed to go and nowhere else. Is that limitation would that cause us problems by that much limitation?
So I don't think so. I mean, if you're picking a specific zoning district and saying you're only having this permissible use within this zoning district, if you've functionally made it to that food trucks cannot operate within that zoning district, then yes, you have functionally prohibited them from operating within your city limits. That becomes problematic. That will likely be hashed out through the court system in a challenge to your ordinance or in some sort of code enforcement capacity. But if you pick places like you have put before you, that Renee has put before you, if you pick places that they could operate, there's at least a potential, even if it is limited, as long as it is fair and reasonable that there are places they can operate, I don't think that you're going to have a problem. I think it's defensible.
Just a thought, a question, whatever. Would it be appropriate or possible to do that, basically say the provision only in the areas spelled out in 5605, but then allow it potentially as a conditional use where each application in other areas had to be reviewed and each set of circumstances considered in the areas that were identified under 5606?
Absolutely. I think that's very defensible.
Wouldn't it be
And
more?
that may be a very good approach in this instance.
Well, and I know that you're talking about regulating the permit for a conditional use permit. My only concern with that is that the preemption is specific to licenses, registrations, permits, and fees, and it specifically lists a permit. I know you're talking about conditional use permit, but because the language is within the statute and it is directly and specifically expressly exempt, I think, or preempted, I think you're going to run into a very large hurdle there.
But even though, I mean, we specifically in our zoning ordinance call out permitted and conditional uses. I mean, if it's a conditional use.
I think, like I said, I still think you can try it, and there may be a challenge, and at the end of the day, the courts might say no. But the way that statutory interpretation works is that the judge is going to read the plain language of the statute, and the plain language of the statute says permit. And they don't have to go any further than that. They don't have to look at the legislative intent to find out what the legislature meant by permit. They're just going to say, you put a secondary permitting process on this. The permitting process was preempted to the state and you violated that preemption. There may be a different mechanism by which you can go through a process like that.
Yeah, we just don't call it a permit.
Well, and maybe, but then there may be a challenge to that. Right, and maybe, but you're still allowing some sort of a license or some sort of permit or some sort of efficacy to what they're doing based on criteria that you're putting in your code. That's, or some administrative process. So I think that you may be able to get around it. I just think that that's going to be, you got to be just very careful how you do it.
So it sounds like it would be better off to just be cutting. I think what you're saying, if I'm interpreting that, is that allow them or don't allow them, but don't do and stay away from conditional anything.
Yeah, and I think the reason, the other reason for that too is because you start getting into criteria, you start getting into some sort of equal protection issues where you're saying, well, this person was allowed to operate their food truck in this capacity, in this type of a scenario. I'm trying to do the same or similar thing and I'm being told I can't because of whatever reason. But the state says I have a permit to operate and I can operate within your jurisdictional boundaries. I should be able to operate in the same or similar circumstances somebody else did.
Okay. That helps me. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not saying that you can't find a creative solution to do it. I'm just saying I'm just warning you to be cognizant of the things that might happen on the back end if you do choose to do those types of things.
Okay. That makes sense.
I mean, up to this point, the city hasn't allowed them at all, right?
That is correct.
So now they'll have more opportunity to have some food trucks in some designated areas. Then there you go.
I mean, absent that, we have no regulation and they can go wherever they want. So until we get something in place, we kind of you can have a bit of a free for all. So
Have they actively been enforcing that? Because I see them all over the place.
So it has a very weird history in Tarpon, because they're not called out in the land development code anywhere. We simply have said, you can't operate, but that was always also done in conjunction with what used to be called an occupational license, which we don't have those anymore. They're business tax receipts, so they're a tax. But under the old regulations that are still in place, there's just a different name now. The closest thing that you had was a peddler license, which said you had to move every 15 minutes. So that effectively just kind of like, the short answer for anybody that calling was like, no, they're not allowed in Tarpon Springs. And that's just been the case for, forever. Well, we can't do that anymore. So
Yeah.
we clearly have to address this in a more comprehensive manner.
Wouldn't it make sense if we address this and took 5605 separate from 5606, excuse me?
We can certainly bifurcate these. That's why I wrote those separately. So, we can recommend adoption of one and not the other. That's not a problem. Again, as long as we're providing, for an adequate area for them to operate under, reasonable conditions, I think, I'll defer to the attorney, but I think we're okay. We just can't say that you can't do them all together. The 5606 was really arising, I will be candid, out of kind of existing circumstances going on right now. So it's something that, if this board, as a group doesn't want to recommend it go forward, then I'll take it forward with that recommendation.
I mean, personally, and I can't speak for anybody but myself, but I think it's going to be simpler to get to a vote tonight, probably with 5605. I would like to see us continue to address 5606, though it's just more complicated than what we probably really have the time or ability to completely work out tonight, exactly how to word it.
Well, Renee,
Yes.
I mean, I think you guys also pull other communities, see how they address these issues, correct?
Yeah, we do. We have looked at what other communities are doing, and it's really kind of all over the place. Some have had regulations in place for quite some time. Dunedin does, St. Pete does. The county just doesn't regulate them at all. They just do what you want. So yeah, they're kind of all over the place.
But I'm sure Dunedin is very protective of its Main Street district with regard to food trucks.
They are looser than you would expect. They do have there's some food trucks down there that you may not even realize are food trucks, because they've kind of built facades in front of them and things, but more on the Skinner Boulevard type of area than on on actual downtown Main Street. That's a different.
It's funny that you said that then, because if somebody had a temporary food truck in their, let's say, beer and wine establishment, they establish almost like if you want to call it a permanent food truck, they could actually build a facade around it.
Yeah, they could. We would have to regulate that, but
still, that there you got your okay. So, Mr. Chairman, I think bifurcating it, whoever suggested that, I think it's a good idea. If Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to have me make a motion on the first
you can't
part.
It's not time for a motion. There hasn't
Okay.
been any public input yet.
I apologize.
And also, I would, just to piggyback on what Vice Chair Kuskoudas said, as far as the regulations, my understanding and my reading of the legislation that's been put in front of you is that these trucks are not allowed to be parked in those locations unless they are operating. So if you regulate from not 5 to 9, they can be parked there from 5 to 9, and at 9:01 they need to pack up and get out. So I don't know. I think that helps with the regulation of putting a facade around it and making it more of a permanent installation, because they are no longer allowed to be there. They can't park overnight. They can't do anything of that nature. If that's my correct understanding, Renee. So I think that is helpful to the regulation that you were talking about, Mr. Kuskudis.
Okay, thank you. I misunderstood it then, because I believed if you had a food truck and it was going to be there every day, that, you know, why are you driving it off if you can just leave it there in the parking lot? So maybe I misunderstood.
That's something that we didn't fully address. I mean, I think the intent was that you could leave them there, you know, for periods of time, as if it's approved as that accessory to a food or drink establishment, not the temporary, you know, daily operations, you know, like out on US 19 or something. So.
Yeah, right. Under 5605, they'd be leaving, right?
Correct.
Under
That is the intent.
5606, they'd be
Staying.
They could be staying. They don't have to, but they
Yeah,
could
but
potentially
they-
get approval
They're
for
gonna
that
stay.
But they would have to remain mobile so that they could be hitched up or started
Correct.
and driven away.
I'd like to voice my support of Chair Seaman's concept of perhaps focusing on 5605. It seems the most straightforward. I like the idea that they're, to quote our board attorney, they're packing up and going home for the night every night. I like that. I think that I could support that idea of the stricter portion, and then look later at 5606. And if we did, in regards to 5606, should we address that at some point? I don't think it would be honest with ourselves that anything other than a permanent structure would occur with those accessory structures. They would look temporary in the beginning or movable, but they would promptly become permanent parts of that. So,
Well, and perhaps, and this is for another time probably, but, you know, perhaps there's a time frame that they're temporary even at those establishments or something.
Well
Because
said.
we do have people that are hurting now with
And
COVID that need to be able to do something.
we
And-
do have a whole temporary use section of the code, and that's how they have addressed this in the past, is to allow, which is a 90-day temporary use. And so I think that, you know, and you can get an extension to that. So I think that's probably, I mean, there's an outlet there if they're so desired. It's already in our code. You just can't do it forever as a temporary use.
Right, right.
I have two comments I want to talk about. With the 5605 for the temporary, we only talked about having one truck per parcel. And I'm wondering about, especially like an industrial park, you've got the one truck comes in and it's Mexican that day, and I don't want Mexican, you know, like I think that there could be, depending maybe on square footage, if they have, you know, the Lowe's parking lot's huge, they could have 2 food trucks there. So I'd like to see that kind of built in somehow to have,
Okay.
if the space is available, that they could have more trucks available for that. And then for 5606, a question I have is, can we separate food and drink establishments? I'm thinking a brewery, their main purpose is they're doing a brewery, and, you know, they want to be able to have food, you know, to patrons that are there that will need a little snack to go with their drink. So they're really not becoming a restaurant owner. They really have no interest. And then they could totally contract that out and get a contractor. But yet a food establishment, using Rusty Bellies as an example, you know, it's kind of an extension of their restaurant. And I don't know if we can put restrictions on like that and kind of separate those two. I think that sometimes when they're all together, then there's two totally, for me, different ways to look at it, whether it's a food or a drink establishment.
Yes, you can. I think there are ways to do that. If the interest is, you know, you're okay with, you know, being accommodating, if you want to call it that, to, you know, you've got an existing restaurant and like Rusty Bellies, and they want to add, you know, a sushi truck, or they want to have a taco truck or something that is explicitly part of their business, and, you know, that I think is that's a, you know, that's a different animal altogether than the way that this is drafted. So I think if that's something that you want to allow, we can, and maybe only start with that. That's certainly doable.
Okay, I'm having a hard time when you bucket them together. So that's, I'd like to see them
Understood.
kind of
Yep.
separated.
Understood.
Because I think that there's valid points for both, or different restrictions or something that you
Sure.
would do.
Okay, is that all the questions for staff? Then I believe that brings us down to public comment. And I think we usually take up the public comment we've received through email or in the mail first, don't we? Do we have, do we want to hear the comments that we've got that came in the mail or by email, or do we just, or may we just consider those into the record because we have them here?
I mean, I'll defer to the attorneys the proper way to do this. They were emailed out. They're fairly old correspondence, but they do pertain to the subject matter at hand. So that's 2 emails that we received in the department when Karen Lemons did her outreach to the business community.
Yeah.
And I would defer to you, Mr. Chairman. There's not necessarily to be read into the record because they're not responsive to the agenda item placed on tonight's meeting specific to this meeting. They were for a different outreach, but if you want to read them into the record so that we have a more complete record and everyone can understand what we're talking about, it's completely up to you.
I'll ask for board members' opinions. Does anybody have a preference?
They could just be noted for the record, Mr. Chairman, unless somebody has a different opinion.
Okay, just read them for the record, please.
Who's got those handy to read? Pat?
No, noted for the record, not necessarily read,
Noted.
just
You want to just
noted.
enter them into the
Noted.
record. Don't read
Yeah,
them.
noted for the
Okay.
record.
I'm sorry, you cut out for just a second. I thought you said read them.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Okay, then do we, in a case like this, do we deal with affected parties or is it just all public comment?
It's just public comment as this is a legislative issue, not a quasi-judicial issue.
Okay, so do we have members of the public raising their hands?
If anyone would like to speak on this issue, please raise your hand. And Mr. Chairman, we do not have any raised hands at this time.
All right. I guess we'll close public comment then. I believe it would be appropriate time to entertain a motion. Mr. Kouskoudas, if you'd like to go back to what you were doing.
You're muted, Mike.
As with first part of the ordinance, it was
5605.
5605. I'd like to make a motion that I guess that we recommend adoption of the ordinance.
Do we have a second?
Can we add the recommendation of number of vehicles per square footage, or can we leave that vague?
With the recommendation that staff evaluate.
Yeah. That's what I was going to suggest.
Yeah.
Staff recommend.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I would also add in the hours of operation. I think Mr. Vesey brought up a good point with that.
So I got the motion. So if anybody wants a second, we can discuss reducing the hours of operation based on our recommendation.
I'll second that motion.
Can we have a roll call, please?
We're not going to have discussion on the motion?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. We should have Discussion on the motion.
I believe Mr. Koulianis had suggested, or somebody, or Bessie, Mr. Bessie suggested about limiting the hours of operation to something more suitable.
We haven't historically wanted food trucks, right? They haven't been in our ordinances, and we have opposed food trucks in the city. Now we're looking at this 5605, which has all these, again, opportunities for food trucks and existing businesses and such. I'm in favor of very strict limitations on these food trucks. I would limit them to the red areas as adjusted. Obviously, I think there's some, I mean, I definitely wouldn't want a food truck near the high school. That would hurt an existing restaurant right next door. But I think that that's the best way to go, that rather than us opening up this door to these establishments, that we limit their hours, that they're in these outside, they're in the industrial areas, they're on US 19. They don't affect downtown at all. They don't affect the docks at all. And that's what I would be in favor of. And we obviously limit their time, because 10 o'clock is I think way too late. I don't think if they're really servicing industrial parks, and then there would be no reason to be there past 6 o'clock.
We do have some out on
not having a food truck in anywhere in the historic district or the sponge docks, just because somebody has a restaurant that they could put a food truck in an areas. These are the areas that we want to protect most. This is our town, and that's what my limitations are, to stay limited, keep it real tight, and that way we abide by the state law, but we don't start accommodating something that we never wanted to start with. It doesn't make sense for us to be going through all these gyrations of how they would do all this stuff. So that's where I'd go, and I don't know how that pertains to the motion, but that's how I'd want to limit it.
I think my motion, Mr. Koulianis, restricts it to the area map that Ms. Vincent had provided, because that's the first part of the ordinance. So that's my motion. If somebody, and I'm not opposed to amending my motion to restrict the time shorter than 10 o'clock. I can amend my motion if somebody wants to make a suggestion.
I go to 6.
I tend to think it depends on where they're located, really. In the industrial district, absolutely, everybody's out of there. At Lowe's, probably everybody's out of there by 8. Some other place, it may be different at every one. So I don't know how to address that, other than to say maybe they can't be open any later than the adjacent establishment or something. I don't know.
Yeah, but Lowe's could have, they could open up till 11.
Okay.
Why do we want to serve dinner at Lowe's? We let the people go to the restaurants in the area. There's lots of nice restaurants on 19. Let the people go there. I think just again, we're doing this because we're mandated by the state. So for us to think about how we accommodate Lowe's or how we accommodate any of these establishments with food, again, it is going to eat into, that's food they're not going to buy in one of the brick and mortar stores. So I think we keep this thing super tight. We keep it in industrial areas. We keep it on 19. That's going to minimize the amount of time, the opportunity that they eat in one of those food trucks versus eating at a restaurant nearby. That's my opinion.
Okay, well, we have the motion.
Okay.
How do we address it?
I guess I just need to stand on my motion because I'm not going to come up with the time unless we can have consensus. I mean, so I'll just stay with my motion. Did the ordinance provide till 10 o'clock?
It did.
You know what? Let me amend my motion to with what the Mr. Chairman had suggested, as long as the business is the adjacent business is open. As far as industrial parks, when they close down at 5 or 6 o'clock, then that would be if it's Lowe's, if they're open till 9 or 10 o'clock, you know, if somebody's going to get a hot dog or something like that, then that so be it.
So like two conditions, 8 to 10, and the operating in the adjacent business must be open.
That the condition is that the adjacent, they can only operate the same hours as the adjacent business.
Okay.
So if it closes at 6, they close at 6. If they close at 4, they close at 4.
What if they stay open? So they can't go past 10 is what you're saying?
Yeah, not past 10 o'clock.
So, all right, I'll throw a wrench into this. So you can have a CVS on US 19. It's open 24 hours a day.
Not to go past 10 o'clock.
Thank you. Okay, that's what I wanted.
Okay, not to go past 10 o'clock.
What if there are multiple businesses? Just something to think about.
Well, the business that they service. So if they're in the business of parking lot A, if parking lot A closes at but no later than 10. So if there's multiple business, I don't care if it's a 24-hour business, it closes. They have to leave by 10 o'clock.
How are you going to police this?
Well, so we have an amended motion by Vice Chair Kuskudis. Who seconded
Correct.
the first motion?
The conditions are that to
Right. No,
adopt.
who seconded your initial motion?
Oh,
Nobody.
okay.
Somebody did.
Oh, I thought Jim
Somebody
did.
had
I
to
thought
have.
somebody did.
Jim Sturbo.
I did.
Yeah, somebody
Okay.
did.
Okay, so do you second the amended motion? Whoever seconded the first motion needs to second the amended motion or it will fail.
Okay, I'll second that motion as well.
Okay, is there any further board discussion of the motion?
Can we read the motion so we understand it?
Just to be clear, to adopt the first ordinance with the two conditions: A, that they can only operate during the same hours as their adjacent business, but but no later than 10 o'clock, no matter how long that business is open.
But have we restricted the area where they can operate?
That's in the original ordinance,
That's an original ordinance.
That.
the red area.
Yep, but again, we're going back to where you could have, let's assume that Tarpon Tavern had its own parking lot.
No, that area is excluded.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's just
we're going back to.
Would have fallen under
Yeah.
56.
the map area, John.
I gotcha. Okay.
Okay, are we all clear on the motion? Then if there's no further board comments on the motion, can we have a roll call?
Mr. Koulianos,
Yes.
Mr. Morgan,
Wait, Mr. Koulianos does not have the opportunity to vote if he's present here. It's just an alternate.
No, I'm sitting in for an absent member.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was something that was brought up earlier, so.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan,
Yes.
Mr. Stavropoulos,
Yes.
Mr. Vesey. Mr. Vesey,
He's muted, but I saw his mouth go yes.
Thumbs up for yes. Okay.
Yes. There he is.
Mrs. McCumber,
Yes.
Mr. Kuskudis,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman.
Yes.
Do you want to make a motion or a recommendation on 5606 portion of this at this point?
If nobody will, I will.
It would just be good for me for clarification going
Okay.
to the Board of Commissioners.
Okay, my motion is to reject the second part of the ordinance. Or recommend not approval, however you want, however terms you want to coach it.
Second.
Mr. Kulianis seconded.
Yes.
I would just in comment, I'd like to say I would be interested in seeing a significantly revised version of that. If, I mean, the city commission may choose to pass or fail the whole thing, and it may be all a moot point, but I think there are people out there that need some help right now, and I'd like to look at some way that could help some of those people, even if it is a temporary situation. So just speaking as one person, I'd like to see potential for future consideration of that, but would agree with, voting it down at this point.
I would also like to see it rewritten a little bit. I'm thinking of Backdrafts goes over to Silver King and provides pizza for their Silver King Brewery customers. I mean, that's two businesses that are winning. So I think that there is opportunity for this. It just needs to be kind of rewritten a little bit, in my opinion.
Thanks.
I agree.
All right, if there's no further discussion, can we have a roll call?
Mr. Kulianis,
Yes.
Mr. Morgan,
No,
Mr. Stavropoulos,
Wait,
Yes.
Oh.
clarification point. Voting yes is voting against 5606. Am I correct? Yes, okay.
But we can also, it will be revised, or we just have to turn it, we just are voting it down.
If they revise it, then they'll have to bring it back for us to vote again, so.
Right,
Okay.
should I start over?
probably because I mucked it all up.
Mr. Kulianis,
Yes.
Mr. Morgan,
no,
Mr. Stavropoulos,
Yes.
Mr. Vesey,
Oh, thumbs down.
okay, so no. Mrs. McCumber,
Yes.
Mr. Kouskoudis,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman.
Yes.
Can we get clarification on Mr. Vesey's vote? Because I didn't see him one way or the other on that one. Yeah, we
Okay.
can't hear you.
He voted yes.
Thumbs up.
Thumbs
Yes.
thumbs down.
Thumbs
Okay.
Thumbs
up.
up. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. This was helpful for me. Very, very much so. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. There's a lot of effort put into that, and we appreciate it.
Well, we got to get something on the books here. So
Yeah.
this gets us a start.
All right, so that brings us to item number 4, staff comments. Does the staff have any comments about anything for us?
I do not.
All right, item number 5, board comments. I have one quick one. I just wanted to say welcome back, Renee, and welcome, John. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have board comments?
Just to welcome back, Renee, and nice to see you, John.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
All right. Did I just say we stand? I never remember this part. We stand adjourned, or do we have to vote on that?
You do not need a motion. You do not need to vote. You have the power all on your own to adjourn the meeting.
I feel so powerful. We're adjourned, everybody.
Thank you.
Computers
Thank
off.
you.
Evening.
Good night.